Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on something that's absolutely essential to your daily life, yet, well, it remains almost entirely invisible. We're talking about the foundational, decades-old nervous system of global mobile telephony, a protocol suite known as Signaling System Number 7, or SS7.
Yeah, it's really the paradox of modern telecommunications, isn't it? You might be holding, a cutting-edge 5G device,
Right.
but the underlying control structure that makes your calls connect, that handles your texts and manages your roaming session, it relies heavily on technology designed way back in the mid-1970s.
That's incredible.
And what's truly shocking, I think, is that SS7 was built on this unquestioned assumption of mutual global
Trust. Between who?
between the big phone companies, basically.
Yeah.
And that trust
Yeah.
is fundamentally evaporated in the digital age.
Okay, so that's the crucial, maybe chilling premise we're working from today. The entire global mobile network operates on a decades-old handshake agreement
Exactly.
that has been weaponized by sophisticated actors globally.
So our mission today is to unpack SS7's foundational design flaws, examine exactly how criminals and nation-states are exploiting these legitimate internal functions for, well, massive surveillance and financial fraud,
Yeah.
and look at the difficult, slow path toward any kind of real defense.
And we really need to establish this point right up front. Attackers aren't engaging in traditional complex software exploits or finding zero-day vulnerabilities.
So it's not hacking in the usual sense.
Not really. They're simply gaining access to the SS7 network, often through readily available commercial means, believe it or not.
Wow.
And then they just issue commands the system was designed to obey. The malice looks exactly like standard network operation.
Which makes it incredibly hard to spot.
Precisely. That's why it's so difficult to detect and block.
Okay, let's unpack this architecture then. To really grasp the vulnerability, we have to start with the blueprint, this blueprint of trust it was built on.
Right. So SS7 was developed by the ITUT during a time of global telecom monopolies. Think big state-run PTTs. Before the internet, before deregulation.
Exactly. And before SS7, older telephony used what we call in-band signaling.
In-band.
It meant the control information, things like the dial digits, those beep-boop tones, network signals, was sent over the same physical channel as the voice traffic itself.
Okay, I can see how that would be slow.
It was slow, it required massive amounts of circuitry, and it was inherently inefficient. You couldn't do much complex signaling that way.
So the genius of SS7 was the introduction of out-of-band signaling, right? That was the big shift.
Exactly. A revolutionary leap in efficiency, really.
Yeah.
The actual voice or data traffic became the bearer channel, right?
A pipe for the conversation.
Yeah. And the control information, the routing, the billing instructions, the location tracking, all that smart stuff was separated. It got transmitted over a completely distinct high-speed digital network, the SS7 network itself.
Ah, okay.
And this allowed for near-instantaneous call setup, and you could exchange much richer control data. It enabled things like caller ID, toll-free numbers.
But that decoupling, that separation, you're saying that's the original sin here.
Well, yeah, it creates that hidden network layer we keep talking about.
Yeah.
The user's phone, your phone, it's only connected to the bearer channel, the voice or data path.
So my phone has no idea what's happening on the signaling side.
Absolutely zero visibility into the signaling network where these malicious commands are issued. If an attacker is tracking you using SS7, it's happening silently, completely beneath the surface, totally outside your handset's awareness.
Okay. So let's visualize this architecture. You mentioned specialized computers, signaling points.
Right, SPS. Think of it as a hierarchy. You really need to know the functions of the three core pieces of equipment that handle every message. These are the building blocks.
So when I make a call or send a text, where does it start? Which nodes are the entry and exit points?
Those would be the service switching points, or SSPs. In a cellular network, these are typically the mobile switching centers, the MSCs.
Okay, the MSCs.
They're the switches that originate, terminate, or switch the calls and messages. They act as the initial interface between your phone and this SS7 nervous system.
Got it. Entry points. What's next? The messengers.
Right, those are the signal transfer points, or STPs. Think of STPs as the hyper-intelligent routers of the SS7 network. They don't handle the call itself, just the control messages.
So they just pass the signals along?
They receive signaling messages and relay them to the proper destination. But here's where a critical, exploitable function resides. Global Title Translation, or GTT.
Global Title Translation. Okay, let's pause there. Why is GTT so important, especially to an attacker?
GTT is basically the high-speed phone book lookup service of the SS7 world. Imagine a message needs to go to a specific phone number, say 555-1234. That E.164 number is meaningless on the internal SS7 network.
It needs an internal address.
Exactly. GTT maps that phone number to the specific unique SS7 network address, the signaling point code of the subscriber's home location register, the HLR, or maybe the VLR, the visitor register.
And attackers need this mapping.
Absolutely. They need this translation mechanism to know where to send their malicious request.
Yeah.
They need to find the target's HLR on the global network. Gateway STPs, the ones that interface between different global networks, are often the prime targets or entry points for external attackers trying to exploit this mapping function.
Okay, so SSPs are the doors, STPs are the routers with the crucial address book. What's the brain? Where's the intelligence?
That's the service control point, or SCP. These are the network databases. They handle all the smart services. Think toll-free number translation, prepaid billing rules, number portability.
And crucially for mobility.
Crucially for mobility, yeah, storing subscriber profiles. The two most important mobile databases, the Home Location Register, HLR, and the Visitor Location Register, VLR, are managed via these SCPs, or functions acting like SCPs.
The HLR, that sounds important.
It is. The HLR is where all your permanent subscriber data lives, your service profile, your authentication keys, and crucially, your last known location. It's the ultimate target for tracking and for fraud attacks.
Okay, so we have the physical nodes. What about the language they speak? The protocol stack. You mentioned we can skip the lower levels.
Yeah, the lower MTP levels, 1 to 3, they handle the basic stuff, physical transmission, error checking, basic network routing. Important, but not where the main exploits live.
Where does it get really interesting for an attacker?
It's in the higher application layers. We're talking about the transaction capabilities application part, or TCCAP. TCCAP acts as sort of a wrapper, an envelope for the actual payload of the command.
Okay, TCCAP is the envelope.
And the specific application protocols it carries inside are the key. Most notably for mobile networks, MAP, the mobile application part.
So TCCAP is the envelope, and MAP is the potentially malicious letter inside.
That's a perfect analogy. MAP is the absolute linchpin for nearly all the attacks we're going to discuss. Why? Because it governs almost every aspect of mobile connectivity.
Like what?
Managing mobility, knowing where you are right now. Handling roaming between networks. Enabling SMS delivery. Subscriber information exchange between different network nodes. All that relies on MAP messages.
And attackers exploit these MAP queries.
Exactly. They craft these MAP queries, wrap them in TCCAP envelopes, and send them off. Because these commands, while legitimate for network operation, retrieve highly sensitive data, but were never designed with modern security boundaries or strict authentication in mind.
Which brings us squarely to the core problem, doesn't it? Section 3 in our outline. It's not really a modern securely failing, but a foundational design flaw. This whole trusted network fallacy SS7 was born from.
You have to put yourself back in the 1970s and 80s. Telecommunications was dominated by government agencies or state-approved monopolies, PTT's Post, Telegraph, and Telephone Authorities.
Right, like AT&T before the breakup or BT in the UK.
Exactly. They operated closed networks, often contained within national borders. It was a true walled garden. Why would one giant state-owned phone company attack another? It didn't make sense.
They were all part of the club.
They were mutually trusting entities, or at least assumed to be. So the protocol's authors, quite reasonably for their time, saw very little need to incorporate complex security features like end-to-end encryption or strong cryptographic authentication between networks. Speed and efficiency were paramount.
So the technical flaws, the vulnerabilities, they were always there, lurking, but they were dormant.
They were absolutely there. They just weren't a systemic risk until two things happened pretty much simultaneously. Global deregulation of the telecom industry and the introduction of IP networking into the core.
Okay, deregulation broke up the monopolies?
Right. Suddenly, instead of a handful of trusted giants, you had thousands of new service providers, third-party aggregators, MVNOs, transit carriers, all needing to interconnect. That original concept of a closed, trusted network was instantly shattered.
And this is where we have to define SIGTRAN, right? Because that's what really blew the doors open technologically.
Yes, SIGTRAN. It stands for Signaling Transmission. Crucially, this is the suite of protocols that allowed classic SS7 messages to be encapsulated and transmitted over standard IP networks, the same internet protocol your computer uses.
So SS7 could ride on top of the internet, basically.
Essentially, yes. Before SIGTRAN, you needed dedicated, physical T1E1 telecom lines, and specialized, expensive hardware to connect to the SS7 network. It was a high barrier to entry.
But once SS7 could run over IP,
The need for that trusted physical connection vanished. It democratized access, you could say, but it also provided an easy entry point for non-traditional telecom actors, including criminal elements, surveillance companies, and really any entity willing to pay a low-tier provider somewhere in the world for an IP connection with SS7 access.
wow. So that introduced the fatal systemic liability we talked about. The network's core assumption of implicit trust is violated every single day, yet the protocol still operates as if it were that cozy club of monopolies.
Absolutely. And the security of the entire global SS7 infrastructure is now only as strong as its weakest, cheapest, or frankly, least scrupulous link.
So an attacker doesn't need to hack into a major carrier like Verizon or Deutsche Telekom.
Nope. They don't need to breach the main gates. They simply need to compromise, or, more likely, just pay or lease access from a small, often obscure SS7 provider anywhere in the world, maybe a transit carrier in a region with lax regulations or oversight.
And that gives them access to the global system.
It gives them access to the global peering system. From that one cheap entry point, they can potentially target any mobile subscriber on the planet, regardless of their home network.
Let's detail those core technical flaws again, the ones that make this access so incredibly dangerous. The sources identify a triple threat of technical shortcomings.
Okay.
First, the most basic security failure: lack of message integrity and encryption.
It's pretty glaring from a modern perspective. All that signaling data, including highly sensitive location queries, instructions for call forwarding, billing updates, even sometimes authentication confirmations, it all travels in
Those texts, like unencrypted.
completely unencrypted. There is zero native cryptography built into the core SS7 protocols, like MTP or SCCP, or even MAP itself. This means if you can somehow tap the signaling links physically, or more likely now, over those IP-EC connections, you can read everything.
It's like sending your banking instructions on a postcard.
That's a very good analogy. Exactly like that.
Okay, second flaw, the flawed operating philosophy. No robust authentication. This implicit trust model. It just seems crazy today.
It does now, yes. But again, it made sense in the 70s. They valued speed and simplicity over complex security handshakes. So a core network node, let's say a home location register, HLR, receiving a TCCAP message from an external SS7 peer.
Like from another carrier overseas.
Right. It simply assumes that peer is legitimate and well-intentioned based on the source address in the message headers. The protocol has no built-in mechanism to cryptographically validate the sender's identity or ensure the message hasn't been tampered with in transit.
And that's what allows spoofing.
That vulnerability is the absolute key ingredient. It allows attackers to easily spoof legitimate network nodes. They can craft a message that looks like it came from a trusted mobile switching center or a valid transit carrier, even though it originated from their own malicious system connected via that cheap, least access point.
And the third flaw is that the legitimate commands themselves are overprivileged messages. They give away too much sensitive data too easily.
Exactly. A single standard MAP query, for instance, the anytime interrogation message asking for location, can retrieve highly sensitive subscriber data like your current cell tower ID without sufficient access controls or rate-limiting checks being universally enforced.
So attackers can just keep asking.
They can poll millions of times if they want, targeting thousands of users. There's no inherent global throttling mechanism built into these fundamental TCCAP-PM peers across all networks. Individual operators might implement firewalls, but the protocol itself doesn't stop it.
So why does this risk persist? We're moving into 5G now. Surely 4G LTE and this new 5G service-based architecture, SBA, they should have retired SS7 entirely by now.
That's the problem, the perpetuation of risk. A complete global rip and replace of SS7 is a monumental task. We're talking multi-decade, staggeringly costly undertakings for every operator worldwide.
Legacy systems are hard to kill.
Very hard. Operators still rely on SS7 for many legacy functions, things that haven't fully migrated to newer protocols. And critically, it's essential for international roaming compatibility.
How so?
Well, when your shiny new 5G phone roams into a country or onto a network that hasn't fully modernized its core.
Which could be many places.
Right. The signaling traffic often still needs to pass through SS7 interfaces to connect back to your home network or handle basic functions. There are translation gateways, but the underlying vulnerability can still be exposed.
And devices can be downgraded?
Yes. Even within a modern network, for compatibility reasons, a device might use older signaling methods. Or, more nefariously, an attacker can sometimes force a device or session to downgrade to use SS7 protocols, specifically to exploit these known weaknesses. So the SS7 vulnerability remains alive and accessible.
Okay. So we have a system that's easily fooled, built on obsolete trust, transmits private data in the clear, and it's still deeply embedded. Let's move into the actual attacks. How are sophisticated actors monetizing this foundational weakness? Section 4.
Right.
The entry point, as we mentioned, is access acquisition. Not usually technical hacking, but commercialized access?
Correct. Getting SS7 access itself is now often a commodity. It's available via leased connections from smaller carriers or through the thriving surveillance for hire market. There are companies, unfortunately, that specialize in providing this capability.
So once they have access.
Once access is acquired, the attacker doesn't need complex malware or exploits. They just need to know how to use the system's own legitimate commands for malicious purposes.
Okay, let's look at attack type 1, covert location tracking and surveillance. This sounds like pure abuse of a legitimate function, right? Mobility management.
It is exactly that. The network must know your current physical location, specifically your serving cell tower or cell ID, in order to route an incoming call or SMS to you. It's fundamental.
And attackers exploit this necessity.
Yes. They send specific MAP messages directly to the target subscriber's home location register, the HLR. The HLR, operating under that old implicit trust model, assumes the request is legitimate. Maybe it thinks it's for billing purposes or a roaming update or call routing.
And it just answers.
It obligingly answers, providing the requested location information.
What are the specific MAP commands used here that we should know?
The two most commonly cited and exploited messages for location tracking are Papania time interrogation, often abbreviated as ATI, and provide subscriber info, or PSI.
ATI and PSI.
When issued by a rogue node pretending to be, say, a legitimate visiting network, these TSAMPAPRAP commands can retrieve the subscriber's unique internal identifier, the International Mobile Subscriber Identity, IMSI.
Okay, their unique ID.
And, crucially, their current Cell Global Identity, or CGI, which includes the cell ID.
And that cell ID translates directly to a physical location on a map.
Absolutely. The cell ID, when cross-referenced with carrier databases or even publicly available cell tower location databases like OpenCellid, maps precisely to the location of the nearest cell tower. This often allows locating the user within a few hundred meters.
And this happens in real time.
In near real time. And this is key entirely silently from the user's perspective. The victim's phone does absolutely nothing different. It doesn't ring. It doesn't get a notification. All the malicious activity is confined to that invisible signaling network layer.
That's genuinely unnerving. Okay, let's move to attack type 2. Financial fraud, specifically bypassing two-factor authentication, or 2FA.
Yeah.
You said this is arguably the most financially damaging use of SS7.
Yes, this is a really devastating and sophisticated two-stage attack. It's clever in a frightening way.
So stage 1 is standard stuff.
Stage 1 is usually traditional credential theft. Could be phishing emails, malware on a computer, social engineering, anything to steal the victim's username and password for, say, their online bank account or a cryptocurrency exchange.
Okay, they have the login, but then there's 2FA, usually an SMS code?
Right. Stage 2 is the SS7 part. This is where they intercept or redirect that critical SMS one-time password, the OTP, that the bank sends for verification.
How exactly do they reroute that SMS? Especially when the victim's phone is still on, connected to the legitimate network, presumably waiting for that text.
They exploit the network's routing flexibility, which is normally used for roaming. They send specific SS7 messages, like MAM update location, or more commonly cited for SMS interception fraud, send routing infoforism, often shortened to SRISM.
SRISM, what does that normally do?
Okay, so legitimately, when an SMS message arrives at the network's SMS center, the SMSC needs to know where the recipient is currently located to deliver it. So it sends an SRISM query to the recipient's HLR asking which MSC is this user currently attached to.
And the attacker intercepts or spoofs that routing response somehow.
They essentially initiate a fake location update first. They send a message, maybe an update location, tricking the HLR into believing the victim's phone has suddenly started roaming onto a rogue mobile switching center, MSC, controlled by the attacker.
So they tell the HLR the user is somewhere else.
Exactly. So now, when the bank sends the SMS OTP, the SMSC queries the HLR using SRISM. The HLR, having been fooled, responds to the address of the attacker's rogue MSC.
So the SMS goes straight to the attacker.
Straight to the attacker's system instead of the legitimate user's device. The attacker intercepts the OTP, plugs it into the banking website, completes the fraudulent, high-value transaction.
Ah,
And then often the attacker might even send a follow-up SS7 message like cancel location to remove the fake roaming profile from the HLR, making the attack even harder to trace afterwards. Often the legitimate user notices maybe only a brief service interruption, if anything at all.
That's incredibly slick. A perfect interception of that critical security layer. Okay, moving on to attack type 3. Call interception and rerouting fraud. This sounds like it's been used for generating illicit revenue streams.
Yes, this type of attack usually involves tampering directly with the subscriber's profile data stored in their HLR. Attackers issue a command like map insert subscriber data, or sometimes a fraudulent map update location request. But this time the goal is different.
What are they inserting?
They insert a fraudulent call forwarding number into the victim's profile settings within the HLR. This is often a premium rate number controlled by the fraudster.
So instead of the call ringing on the victim's phone,
Or sometimes even SMS being delivered, it gets automatically diverted by the network to this expensive, revenue-generating number owned by the criminals.
sneaky.
Very. We saw this in cases like the 2022 Celcom Malaysia fraud incident mentioned in the sources. Subscribers' incoming calls were being silently diverted to premium rate numbers, generating illicit revenue for the criminals until the carrier finally detected the pattern of unusual profile modifications.
And finally, attack type 4. Denial of service, or DOS. This is about isolating the victim, not necessarily stealing directly.
Right. This is less about immediate theft and more about disruption or preventing communication. Attackers can try to flood the network infrastructure itself, sending huge volumes of MTP or SCCP messages to try and exhaust the processing resources of signal transfer points, STPs, or home location registers, HLRs, potentially causing network slowdowns or outages for many users.
But it can be targeted, too.
Yes, a more targeted DOS attack against an individual involves continuously issuing fraudulent update location messages for that specific subscriber.
How does that deny service?
Each fake update location message essentially deregisters the target phone from the legitimate network it's currently attached to. The phone then has to try and re-register, authenticate again. But before it can stabilize, another fake update arrives. This can effectively isolate the user, preventing them from making or receiving calls and messages during the attack window. It could be used to silence an activist, prevent someone calling for help, or disrupt communication during a critical event.
Okay, the theory is clearly sound, frighteningly so, and the mechanism is proven. Now, let's look at Section 5, real-world exploitation. This is where the industry's theoretical risk became an undeniable, public, and often costly reality.
Yes, and we absolutely must begin with the academic wake-up calls. These were primarily delivered by German security researchers Carsten Knoll and Tobias Engel, especially at the Chaos Communication Congress, or CCC. For years, this SS7 vulnerability was kind of a whispered secret, an open secret maybe, within telecom engineering circles.
Known but not widely publicized.
Exactly. But their demonstrations, particularly in 2014 and 2016, really put it on the front page and forced the industry to confront it publicly.
Tell us about that 2014 demonstration. What exactly did Knoll do, and why was it so impactful at the time?
So Knoll first established just how cheap and easy SS7 access could be to acquire. He basically paid a small European SS7 provider, a transit carrier, for a standard network peering connection. That gave him a legitimate entry point into the global SS7 system.
Okay, he bought his way in.
Pretty much. He then targeted his own phone as the victim. He crafted and sent the specific TSAC-wrapped map anytime interrogation command, the ATI message we discussed, towards his own HLR.
And his HLR responded.
It did. Believing this request came from a legitimate roaming partner network because Knoll's leased connection looked legitimate, the HLR revealed his phone's current cell ID.
So he proved real-time tracking was achievable from potentially thousands of miles away, using only standard network commands, no phone hacking involved.
Exactly. He tracked his own handset's location to within a few hundred meters, just based on the cell ID.
Yeah.
And the crucial detail he highlighted was the lack of internal detection or alarms. He observed his own mobile switching center logging repeated HLR queries coming in from this external source.
But they weren't flagged as suspicious?
No, because they were categorized by the existing systems simply as legitimate roaming traffic. No alarms were triggered. The containment at the time was minimal. The provider eventually revoked Knoll's specific account access, but the underlying infrastructure itself, the vulnerability, remained wide open globally.
And then the threat was amplified even further in 2016, wasn't it? When Null's team demonstrated remote surveillance on a sitting U.S. Congressman, Ted Lieu, live on CBS's 60 Minutes.
Yeah, that event was a real watershed moment. Seeing them track Congressman Liu's location in near real time, intercept his phone calls, and actually read his unencrypted text messages, all initiated remotely from their lab in Berlin via SS7 commands.
Televised proof.
It was televised proof that remote mass-scale surveillance could be achieved without ever touching the target's device, without installing any spyware. This really forced industry acknowledgement like never before. It also prompted U.S. lawmakers to demand immediate investigations into carrier security practices, particularly concerning those international SS7 peering agreements.
So the threat quickly pivoted, or rather expanded, from potential espionage theory to pure high-value monetization. Which brings us to the 2017 German bank heists. This seemed to confirm SS7's use for large-scale financial crime.
Yes, this incident was a perfect storm, really. It combined traditional cybercrime, phishing, with this advanced telecom fraud capability. First, the hackers stole online banking credentials, usernames, and passwords from numerous victims, likely through phishing campaigns.
Okay, standard stuff so far.
But then, they leveraged SS7 access, obtained through a foreign mobile network provider, likely using those SRISM request manipulations we talked about.
To intercept the 2FA codes.
Exactly, to temporarily redirect all the victims' incoming SMS messages to the attacker's own system. So when the victims logged into their bank accounts online and initiated bank transfers, the bank sent the critical MTN, the mobile transaction authentication number, their OTP, via SMS.
And the attackers got it instead of the victims.
They intercepted the code, bypassed the entire second layer of security, and authorized large, often irreversible, money transfers out of the victims' accounts.
And the banks, or the users, had no warning this SMS interception was happening.
Apparently none until it was too late. The fraud was only discovered post-factum, after victims reported the fraudulent transactions. The German mobile provider involved, O2 Telefonica, later confirmed the breach and was forced to hastily try and contain the attack by identifying and blocking the specific foreign provider network that was being used to launch the SS7 part of the attack.
What was the long-term impact of that heist?
Well, besides the financial losses, the major long-term impact was probably on security best practices and regulation. It solidified the expert recommendation, almost made it mandatory in security circles, that banks and other high-security institutions must move away from relying solely on SMS-based two-factor authentication. It was clear proof that SMS-2FA was structurally unsound due to these underlying SS7 vulnerabilities, especially for high-value targets.
Okay, moving forward chronologically to 2019 and 2020. Here we see clearer evidence of state-sponsored espionage being conducted systematically using SS7 against citizens traveling abroad.
Yes, this came to light primarily through whistleblower data leaks. The leaks detailed evidence showing literally millions of SS7 location tracking requests originating from certain Saudi Arabian carriers.
Targeting whom?
Specifically targeting Saudi citizens while they were traveling within the United States. These weren't occasional pings. The data showed systematic high-frequency requests. They were using legitimate SS7 messages like provide subscriber information, PSI, and send routing information, SRI, primarily to pinpoint the user's locations, sometimes multiple times per hour over extended periods.
So this wasn't just incidental tracking. It looked like a deliberate campaign. Confirmed SS7's use as a persistent, high-volume attack vector for systematic government surveillance.
Absolutely. The sheer volume and the targeted nature, the frequency of those requests strongly indicated a persistent surveillance campaign. This prompted significant political scrutiny back in the U.S., focusing on the security, or lack thereof, of domestic carriers' SS7 peering agreements with certain foreign entities. It really highlighted that SS7 wasn't just a playground for criminals, but a core piece of infrastructure being actively used for global espionage.
Okay, our final case study offers maybe a glimmer of hope, or at least a crucial note on defense. The 2021 Vodafone Spain SMS OTP theft incident. It shows that while the attacks definitely persist, detection is possible with the right kind of tools, right?
Right. In this case, attackers were again using forged SRISM requests, that SMS routing query, to try and route SMS OTPs for corporate banking users through a rogue SMSC they controlled, similar mechanism to the German bank heists.
But Vodafone caught it.
The attackers were sophisticated, yes. But the detection method here was the key insight. Vodafone Spain had recently deployed a new anomaly detection platform specifically designed to monitor SS7 traffic patterns. This platform wasn't just looking for known bad signatures or blocking based on source country alone.
It looked for unusual behavior.
Exactly, it flagged suspicious patterns. The system raised an alert because it detected a sudden, statistically unusual spike, a rapid, high-volume jump in SRI-SN requests originating from a single international peering partner.
Not just any requests, but specific ones.
Right, specifically targeting a group of high-value corporate accounts. It was the combination of volume, message type, source, and target profile that triggered the alarm. This allowed Vodafone's security team to achieve rapid containment.
What did they do?
They immediately dropped the SS7 interconnect link with that specific offending partner network, blocking all signaling from them, and worked to ensure legitimate traffic was rerouted safely. This case really confirms that simply having a basic static SS7 firewall isn't enough anymore. You need advanced anomaly detection capable of real-time behavioral analysis to catch these attacks that cleverly masquerade as legitimate network traffic.
Okay, so it's clear the attacks are sophisticated, they're monetized, they're state-sponsored, and they're definitely ongoing. This leads us perfectly into Section 6. If this vulnerability is decades old, very public knowledge now, and demonstrably financially devastating, why is defense still so structurally difficult, and what actually can be done?
Well, the difficulty really comes down to the fundamental structure of the global telecom ecosystem itself. We're talking about a vast, interconnected web, a global federation of over 800 mobile network operators, plus countless transit carriers, roaming hubs, and signaling providers.
All built with varying levels of modernization.
Exactly. Varying levels of modernization, different regulatory oversight in different countries, different security postures, different budgets.
And that opaque interconnect chain you mentioned earlier sounds like a security nightmare. Trying to trace an attack back through multiple hops?
It absolutely is. Signaling traffic often passes through multiple intermediate carriers and international clearinghouses, sometimes half a dozen steps or more between the original sender and the target network's HLR.
Making attribution almost impossible.
It makes tracing the true originator of a malicious message incredibly difficult. The origin node address in the SS7 message might be spoofed, and the intermediate transit nodes might be completely innocent carriers just passing the message along as instructed. You don't know where the bad actor really is.
And then there's the economic tension, isn't there? Roaming revenue must play a huge role in keeping things insecure.
It's a massive business pressure, absolutely. Mobile network operators, MNOs, earn very significant revenue by granting broad SS7 access to international partners to support customer roaming. That's how your phone works when you travel.
So locking things down too tightly could hurt the bottom line.
Potentially, yes. Restricting signaling too aggressively to enhance security runs the risk of accidentally blocking legitimate, profitable roaming traffic from partners. MNOs are often hesitant to completely block global peering connections, even from regions known to be sources of fraud, because the potential loss in legitimate roaming revenue often outweighs the periodic, albeit sometimes large, cost of dealing with fraud detection and mitigation after the fact. It's a difficult balance.
So that economic barrier, combined with the slow pace of developing and agreeing on new international standards from bodies like the ITU-T or GSMA, it creates this state of perpetual underdefense almost.
That's a fair way to put it. But operators do have tools at their disposal. They aren't helpless. The primary defense mechanism today is the SS7 firewall.
But not just any firewall.
No, absolutely not. It must be a sophisticated one, designed specifically for the nuances of signaling traffic. A standard enterprise network firewall that just looks at IP addresses and ports is completely useless here. A high-quality SS7 firewall needs to be deployed deep within the carrier's core network, usually at the border STPs, to screen and potentially rate limit those specific, exploitable MAP and TCF messages.
Okay, so what are the essential functional technical requirements for an SS7 firewall that can actually make a difference?
Well, based on the attacks we've seen, you're looking for primarily two core capabilities, often working together. First, what's sometimes called category filtering, or GSMA IR.71, FS.11 filtering. This essentially means strict whitelisting and blacklisting based on context.
Like knowing who should be talking to whom.
Exactly. It means defining rules about which SS7 peers, which other networks, are trusted to issue certain types of sensitive messages like location requests, ATI, PSI, or subscriber data updates, ISDUL, to specific parts of your network or specific ranges of your subscribers.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If a request like Mapane time interrogation arrives from a network peer in a country where your MNO has absolutely no legitimate roaming agreement targeting one of your domestic subscribers,
The firewall should just drop it.
It must drop it immediately based on a combination of the message type, ATI, the source network ID, and the destination subscriber's profile. For example, they aren't currently roaming. It's about identifying who should be allowed to ask what, about whom, and from where.
Okay, so that's filtering based on known relationships and message types. What's the second key feature? You mentioned it addresses behavioral patterns.
Right, that's the anomaly detection systems, and specifically velocity checks.
Hmm.
Velocity checks are absolutely essential for fighting certain types of fraud, especially location fraud or SIM swap indicators.
How do they work?
They detect implausible location changes. For example, if a subscriber's phone registers successfully on a cell tower in London, and then just 5 minutes later, a signaling message arrives, claiming they've registered on a tower in Tokyo.
Physically impossible.
Right. That suggests something is wrong. It could be a SIM swap, where the fraudster has activated the victim's SIM elsewhere, or it could be purely signaling manipulation via SS7, trying to establish a fake roaming location. The velocity check flags this impossible geographical jump.
And the broader anomaly detection.
That monitors the rate, volume, and patterns of specific message types, often using machine learning now. As the Vodafone Spain case showed, catching that sudden unusual spike in SRI-SM requests coming from a single peer, especially targeting high-value accounts, is often the only way to flag a sophisticated attack that's trying hard to look like legitimate traffic. It spots the abnormal behavior.
But even with these tools, relying solely on hundreds of individual carriers around the world to perfectly secure this leaky foundation, it doesn't seem like enough. Financial institutions, businesses, they have to adapt too, right? They have to assume the SS7 network underneath SMS is compromised infrastructure.
Absolutely. I think the most effective, the most crucial remediation advice for any organization, bank, tech company, government agency that relies on SMS for critical functions like authentication or notifications is unequivocal. Abandon SMS-based two-factor authentication entirely. Just stop using it for anything important.
Because the threat isn't going away.
The threat is not going away anytime soon. SS7 access is available, the exploits are known, and SMS-2FA is now fundamentally broken, architecturally flawed, especially for protecting high-value targets.
Yeah.
Continuing to rely on it is negligent, frankly.
So what are the necessary alternatives that institutions must move to?
Institutions need to rapidly transition their users to stronger methods. The main ones are authenticator apps on smartphones. Apps like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, AuthIDuo.
How are they better?
They generate time-based one-time passwords, TOTP codes, locally on the device itself using a shared secret and the current time. The code is never transmitted over the vulnerable SMS SS7 network. So interception via SS7 is impossible.
Okay, authenticator apps are better. What about for the highest security users?
For the highest security users, think corporate finance accounts, system administrators, journalists, activists, VIPs. They should really adopt hardware security keys like YubiKeys or Google Titan keys that support protocols like FIDO2 or WebAuthn.
How do those work?
These require a physical device to be present, plugged in or tapped via NFC, and involve cryptographic challenge response protocols directly between the device and the service. They are resistant to phishing and bypass signaling networks entirely. They're the gold standard right now.
Okay, that's what institutions need to do. What about me, the individual subscriber? Sitting here with my phone, if I'm worried about this, what are my immediate practical defenses? What can I actually control?
It's limited, but the key is to try and circumvent the vulnerable SS7 delivery method whenever possible, especially for sensitive communication.
So avoid SMS for important stuff.
Pretty much. For sensitive conversations, use end-to-end encrypted messaging services. Think Signal, WhatsApp, Wire, maybe iMessage between Apple devices.
How does that help against SS7 attacks?
Because those services use their own end-to-end encryption, meaning only the sender and recipient can read the messages. And, crucially, they rely on sending data packets over the Internet, IP, completely bypassing the SMS system and the underlying SS7 control plane for message delivery. So SS7 vulnerabilities related to SMS interception or location tracking via SMS attempts become irrelevant for these apps.
Okay, encrypted messaging. What else?
Always choose app-based 2FA, using one of those authenticator apps we mentioned, over SMS 2FA whenever a service offers you the choice. For your bank, your email, your social media, If they offer an authenticator app option, use it. Don't default to SMS just because it seems easier initially.
So take control where you can, basically. Use stronger apps for chat and
Not
authentication.
exactly. Minimize your reliance on SMS for anything sensitive.
Ultimately, though, the real long-term solution requires retiring SS7 altogether, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's the only definitive answer. The complete phase-out of SS7 and the full reliance on its designated successors protocols like Diameter, which is heavily used in 4G LTE networks, and the newer 5G service-based architecture, SBA.
How are Diameter and 5G SBA fundamentally more secure?
They were designed from the ground up for an IP world with security much more baked in. They support native mandatory encryption for signaling traffic, usually using protocols like TLS or IPsec. They also employ much more rigorous, cryptographically strong authentication mechanisms between network elements and for roaming sessions. They essentially eliminate that dangerous implicit trust model at the architectural level.
But acknowledging the reality, the complexity, the global scale, the enormous expense involved in replacing SS7 everywhere, we're going to be living in this messy hybrid environment for the foreseeable future, aren't we? Where SS7 remains the weak, vulnerable underbelly, especially for global roaming.
Unfortunately, yes, that seems very likely. The threat will continue to exist as long as even one significant network somewhere in the world still relies on SS7 for international peering and doesn't properly filter traffic at its borders. It's a truly systemic risk that probably requires strong regulatory mandates and international cooperation, not just relying on individual market incentives, to finally address comprehensively.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this. What does this deep dive really mean for you, the listener? We've seen that the nervous system of global mobile communication, SS7, is fundamentally built on an obsolete foundation of trust.
Right, and SS7's original efficiency, which was born of that benign era of state monopolies, has paradoxically transformed it into a powerful, largely invisible tool for modern financial crime and state-sponsored espionage, all because of its inherent foundational design flaws. Clear text signaling, that dangerous implicit trust model, and overprivileged commands that grant easy access to sensitive subscriber data, access that can now often be purchased commercially.
So the security of your mobile communication, your mobile banking, even your physical location privacy relies heavily on an invisible, globally federated network layer that you, as a user, cannot see or control. And its security is perpetually only as strong as the weakest, least secure, or perhaps most financially vulnerable provider in the entire international chain of hundreds of networks.
And while incremental hardening, like deploying those sophisticated SS7 firewalls with anomaly detection, is vital, and it definitely helps mitigate some of the worst abuses,
Right.
it really remains a technical band-aid. A necessary one, perhaps, but still a band-aid over a gaping structural flaw that exists across continents and decades of technology.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is our final provocative thought for you to consider as we wrap up. Given what concrete steps should global regulators and national governments be taking right now? Should they mandate timelines, impose penalties? How can they enforce the rapid, widespread adoption of secure protocols like Diameter and 5G SBA and ensure protection for the most vulnerable, high-value targets, rather than just allowing the market to slowly, perhaps too slowly, transition at the speed of corporate balance sheets and quarterly earnings reports?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Where does responsibility truly lie, and what enforcement mechanisms actually work on a global scale for critical infrastructure?
Something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive.